This episode of the Lutheran Cartographer is brought to you by the Ron Paul Homeschool Curriculum. If you're looking for a good curriculum, check it out at lutherancartographer.com/homeschool. The Lutheran Cartographer, Episode 34. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer, the podcast where we explore what it's like to be Lutheran in different places. I'm your host, Nicholas Weber. Today we're going to Casper, Wyoming to talk to Pastor Jon Olson. He is the pastor of Trinity Lutheran Church. Pastor Olson, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Help orient us geographically. Most people know where Wyoming is, but where exactly in Wyoming are we in Casper?
Almost right in the middle of the state. In terms of within the country, we are the least populated state in the United States.
Around 500,000 people. Casper itself is 58,000 people. We're the second most populated city by like a couple thousand. I think Laramie is the more populated. That's where the University of Wyoming is. Casper really is like a prairie island. There are no cities around us to speak of. Once you drive out of the city limits, it's prairie, sagebrush, a little bit of rolling hills. Within Casper, we're at the foot of Casper Mountain, just part of the Laramie Range. It's a small town, relatively speaking, of course. There's a Target, a Starbucks, pretty much everything we'd want. The only thing missing is a Culver's. We're from the Midwest, so we miss that. Occasionally we'll go to Cheyenne and eat there.
Okay, so that kind of gives us an idea where we are in the state. So you've already started to touch on what are some of the best things about being in Casper.
Yeah, well, in Casper itself, there's two Missouri Synod churches. One is the one that I'm the pastor at. I'll be 4 years in October. And the other is across town, Mount Hope Lutheran Church. They have a classical school as well. And the best thing about living here is our children get to go to a classical Lutheran school, and our churches work together. We're not at odds. The pastors at both churches get along wonderfully. Our families are growing up together. There's a lot of young families at both churches, and we do a lot of things together that way. Yeah, that's a little bit about, I don't know if you want to get into the theological side of what it's like here, but
Let's get into that a little later. Let's talk now about the flip side. What are some of the challenges about being in Casper?
well, it's very far from family. My family's from Wisconsin, so my dad's there. My sister's in Missouri. Emily's parents are in Missouri. That's my wife. We have other relatives in Ohio and Illinois, so that makes it a little difficult. Casper does have a so-called international airport. Pretty much everything goes to Denver from here, or Salt Lake City. But we can get out and we can fly where we need to. But my wife and I have 6 children, and flying really is not in the cards at this point. Other than that, I've lived a lot of different places, but I prefer where I am at these days more than any.
That is fantastic. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to Casper.
Well, I had been a pastor in southwest Minnesota, Pipestone, Minnesota, for about 7 or 8 years. And then the last couple of years served a vacancy, which became a dual parish with that same congregation. I was called to out of seminary in Pipestone, Minnesota. The other church that became a dual parish with us was in Jasper. And that was a couple of years. And then one day I received a phone call from our wonderful district president, John Hill, that in which he told me that I had been called to Trinity Casper, and was I available for a call? And I said, absolutely. And long story short, I've been here since October of 2016. And I've been a lot of other places. I'd grown up in Milwaukee. I went to Fort Wayne Seminary. did a year of exchange at Cambridge University in England. Happened to meet my wife there. She's from Ohio. Vicared in Norwalk, Connecticut. So I've been all over in terms of large cities, small cities. Our kids don't know any different because they all were raised in Pipestone. So they think this is the big city. Occasionally we'll be driving on the freeway and see off in the distance, like Indianapolis or Chicago or St. Louis. And we'll just we try to tell them that's really a big city. They've probably never even seen a skyscraper up close. So in terms of what is preferable, I kind of shared some of the questions I might be asked with my wife the last couple of days, and just to get her input, and she agrees this is the best place that we've been.
Excellent. So let's then talk about how you would approach talking about what it's like to be Lutheran in the Casper area.
Yeah, it is. There are many different churches here. The largest ones tend to be Roman Catholic, or the sort of big box, non-denominational, more entertainment worship style. We are not of that variety. We're probably middle, average size in terms of Missouri Synod congregations, about 350 to 400, and then on Sunday about 150 in worship. But we are very, very liturgical. My background as a seminarian was I did my field work at Redeemer in Fort Wayne, Indiana, with Pastor Peterson, and I learned quite a bit of the higher liturgical practices. I'm also wise enough to know I will never use everything that I learned here, but we're probably considered more of the higher church liturgical flavor, with chanting and solid hymns, pretty much strictly setting 3 in the Lutheran service book, solid hymnody, divine service, communion every Sunday. And what's wonderful is the church across town does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that provides a lot of unity within Lutheran circles, and it is a great benefit. I've been elsewhere where the churches did not really see eye to eye or get along, and here they do, and I'm really, really thankful for that.
Yeah, that is definitely a blessing. So you've mentioned that that the larger places are Roman Catholic. In the general population of Wyoming, is there an awareness of what Lutheranism is, or is it a more obscure thing?
Yeah, that's more to the point of, I think, what you were asking. Sorry about that. Well, I think for the most part, the people who come here had been Lutheran before they came to Casper. We do get some converts from Catholicism, disappointed with the leftward drift that church body's undergone. We tend to get members who move here, work in the oil and gas industry, in terms of having been Missouri Synod Lutheran in the Midwest. Don't see a lot of East Coast or West Coast people moving to Casper. It just doesn't happen. But also, the church I'm a pastor at has been here. It's the older church. We're actually the mother church of Mount Hope. We've been here since 1917. So there's a long history here, Missouri Synod Lutheran, also within the state since the late 1890s, I think. And mostly the members move around cities depending on jobs, what's available in the state. Being oil and gas, they're diversifying the economy a little bit. probably way more than it was 15, 20 years ago, but even still, you got to go where the jobs are. And sometimes that's Casper, and we're glad to have members come and check us out.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned your 6 children. What's it like to raise a family in Casper?
Well, like I said, it's wonderful. There's a school, and that was a major consideration when I was called to be the pastor here. We had been homeschooling in Pipestone, Minnesota. Pipestone is a southwest corner of that state. Prairie, no hills, very flat, lots of farming, but no schools. They would have had a public school. We weren't too thrilled with that idea. So we had been homeschooling, and for a call to come with a Lutheran, and we had been looking into classical education, and actually were doing classical education with our children at the homeschool level. And then to have the opportunity to come here where it was a classical Lutheran school with a church and pastor that I get along with, that we agree in doctrine and practice, is a wonderful thing.
That is really a blessing, yeah. So let's talk next about kind of one of the stereotypes that people have about Wyoming, and I'd be interested to hear if that's true or not, and that is that the weather is terrible and the winters are brutal.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll be honest, the weather is terrible at times. We will get sometimes 50 to 100 mile an hour winds coming off the mountain.
Oh, wow.
The 100 mile an hour winds are rare, but I think Chicago's called the Windy City. They don't really have much on us concerning wind. We will get constant winds of 20 to 30 some days, with probably typical gusts 40 to 50, and it does get old. It gets tiresome. But then God will give us a break, and we'll get, like today, just a little breeze, and it's 60 right now at 9 in the morning. It'll warm up to barely 80. No humidity, absolutely none. Which, growing up in the Midwest, is wonderful. You gotta get used to a little bit of the dry air, things like that. But with no humidity, we don't have mosquitoes.
Great.
Yeah. There is snow, but because we live in Casper, we know what to do with the snow. We go ski. We have a downhill slope called Hoganon Ski Area, and also cross-country skiing. One of the best cross-country trail systems in the country, and just beautiful. And the cross-country skiing is on the side of a mountain, so a lot of the cross-country skiing we do is downhill with cross-country skis, which makes it very exciting. Our whole family skis, and so we know what to do with the snow. And here it melts. We don't typically get long stretches of below zero weather like we would get in Minnesota in January and February. Here you get a couple days and then the snow melts. There's no snow on the ground for 2 months. It pretty much melts within a week at the most.
I see. Okay. Let's take a moment for a word from our sponsor. At this time, a lot of parents and grandparents are considering keeping their children at home when the government schools open back up in the fall, and I would encourage you to do the same. If you're looking for a curriculum, I would recommend checking out the Ron Paul Homeschool Curriculum. This will teach your children well how to live in the left-hand kingdom, with classes in business, natural sciences, as well as college prep, in addition to all the usual subjects that you would expect from any curriculum, such as mathematics and history. Best thing about this curriculum is that it is self-directed after the 3rd grade, so you don't have to pull your hair out trying to stay a step ahead of your children in the curriculum. If you're interested, I'd recommend checking it out at lutherancartographer.com/homeschool. That's lutherancartographer.com/homeschool. Let's get back to our guest. Let's say that someone is considering a move to rural America. So, just in general, at this time with the coronavirus, people are increasingly uncomfortable in the city. What would your general advice, not necessarily to Casper, but what would you say to somebody who's looking to maybe move to a more rural area? What should they know?
Well, they should certainly look for their church first. I know pastors would always do that, right? But laity tend to a little bit more focused on their job and financial things, and that's obviously important. Schools are important, but I really think in these days of um, theological kind of upheaval with recent Supreme Court decisions and the number of different things that we're dealing with in morals, uh, you need to find a church that is soundly Lutheran. And I would think that Wyoming itself is a great draw for that, not just for pastors, but for laity who are tired of disunity. But within our district, we're pretty unified, and I can just speak for Casper. We are here as well.
Good deal. What other things should people what you did right now and talk about the importance of church is absolutely I'd say one of the most important thing as you're looking for word and sacrament and continue to be fed. And what other parts would you say in terms of general advice for people thinking about rural move to a more rural location?
Yeah. Well, in rural living, you can't go hunting in the big city. And that would be another thing to consider. If you're an outdoors person, you like hiking, we have a mountain. Um, we call it our mountain. And we use it pretty regularly. There's some beautiful walking and hiking trails there. Like I said, there's skiing. But where we live, I started hunting in Minnesota, just deer. And then I received a call here. My brother-in-law who works for Cabela's corporate, and I told him where I was called, and he said, "Oh, John, that's like one of the best hunting outdoors places to be in the country." There's the Platte River that runs through town. I didn't mention that. So we have fly fishing on the river. Uh, you can hunt not only deer. We have two types of deer, mule deer and whitetail. But you can hunt elk. If you're really into hunting, you can hunt bears, mountain lions, everything here, antelope. Um, so if you're an outdoors person, you like camping, those sorts of things. You like wide open spaces. We're not quite Montana with big sky country, but we're very, because of the less densely populated area, you can get out in the country and be by yourself pretty within 10 minutes. And I can be on the mountain skiing in a half an hour. I can go hunt deer in half an hour. So being rural in that way, just outdoor stuff and hunting that's a great advantage.
Absolutely, yeah. So at this time, when we're recording this on the 17th of June, a lot of places, including my home state of Washington, are in the stages of lockdown over the coronavirus. What's it like in Wyoming in that regard?
Right now in Wyoming, we've had 5 or 6 continuances from the governor and his health department person. And the first 3 or 4 were getting increasingly more restrictive. Actually, the 4th one was concerning because they were giving our churches directions regarding communion practice. And the pastors and our district president felt that was stepping into an area that, one, they had no competency in, and 2, they did not belong. And so it had to do with in the communion um, distribution itself, and also the pastor having to wear a mask. And the language used was must and shall. And we respectfully disagreed, sent letters to the governor. Our district president went and met with the governor, and just laid out our protections afforded to us in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and just said you're crossing the line in some of these things, and we'd really appreciate it if you would scale back the language a little bit and use less restrictive words than must and shall. And they heard us out. The health department person didn't really care to hear that, but the orders since have lightened up on the language and have used "if it is possible" and strongly encourage and things like that. So that made us very happy. Just being narrowly focused on what went on in the church, within the state and restaurants and business. Our governor, his name is Mark Gordon. He was very careful to not just close everything down right away, but he was very particular with being very aware. Wyoming is it's a very conservative state. Generally, well, always votes Republican, but it is probably more libertarian leaning than it is actual Republican in terms of political stuff. It's pretty much like cowboys. Leave us alone, we'll defend ourselves. And
we won't get into your business, kind of thing.
Yeah, don't get into our business. We won't get into yours. So with that, we really just have to deal with the local things. And our restaurants have all opened back up. People are pretty tired of it. And you go out in the stores and they're being polite and they're keeping their distances. But I would say 2/3 of the people don't wear masks. A third of them are wearing them. I'm not, I don't think myself and my members are not judgmental of those who are concerned about those things. But likewise, we expect the same treatment, that we'll be left alone to express our conscience in the way we see fit in terms of those types of things. Our churches had no COVID cases, and neither has the other church in town. So we're very happy with that. Our nursing homes are still on lockdown. There's a little bit of work to be done there in terms of being able to see members who have not seen since March.
Wow.
I'm going to be calling. They're trying to open up. I would say setting aside the communion practice issues where we think they overstep their bounds. The governor's done a very fair and even job with not being too alarmist with the COVID things, but actually letting the statistics of the state kind of drive what we're doing. And I don't even think we have 2,000 cases. I haven't looked in a month, so I don't know for sure. But so that's a little bit about that.
All right. So now let's say that you've got a friend coming into town. We've talked about the hunting, the outdoor activity. What things would you point them to in terms of things to do or things to see or places to eat?
Yeah. We have a few. Obviously, we have pretty much all the chain restaurants like Outback and Texas Roadhouse and stuff like that. But I would direct them more to the local. There's really three or four main restaurants. They're owned by the same people, but they're more local. One is Fire Rock Steakhouse. It's probably the higher end, better steakhouse in Casper. We also have a Wyoming Rib and Chop House. I'll just tell you, my preference is the Fire Rock one because it's on my side of town, and I think the food's better. So they have our beef out here is fantastic. If it's not from Wyoming, it's from Montana. So it's delicious eating. There's a couple restaurants, Johnny J's and Jay's Pub, Wyoming Ale Works. All these places are owned by the same people, and they're all really good restaurants. We have a lot of microbrew offers for different flavors of beer. There's a couple private business, like Rocca's Pizza is really good. Cottage Cafe, my wife really loves that place. They do salads and lighter fare, but really good coffee. Those would be the places I'd eat. We don't really have a mall anymore, so we really couldn't do that. We did have one, but the big box department stores started moving out. It's Sears and Macy's, and now with the COVID stuff, I was just looking at Best Buy, and they have curb pickup pretty much. You look online, get what you want, go and pick it up or have it shipped. They don't even let you in the store. Some places do, but we have Walmart and Sam's Club. But family time is important to us, and we would just enjoy having them at our house, grilling out in the backyard, and just sitting as a family and visiting. When the wind's not blowing, the outdoors is the place to be. And I would say, in terms of wind blowing, it's maybe 100 days out of the 365 we have. So,
All right. Excellent. So let's now transition as we start to come to the end of the podcast. I want to make sure to give you the opportunity to point our listeners to anything that you would like to, whether that's your church's website, places to follow you online. Where would you like to point our listeners towards?
Yeah, you can check out tlc-casper.org. I'm not a great blogger. What I mean by that is I don't update regularly. I did a little bit more of it during the beginning days of the COVID things. But we don't stream our services. But I'll send out sermons and do whatever we can that way. But come and visit our church. Church is at 9:00 Sunday mornings. Usually you'd only have one service to go to. At this time we have two with the COVID recommendations and social distancing, but I think that'll be coming to an end next month. So we'll just be back to one. The Mount Hope is another great church to check out. They're at 9:00 as well on the west side of town. If you're a sleeper in and you want to go to church in Glen Rock, where I'm the pastor right now, I'm serving a vacancy there. That's at 2:00. If you really like small rural parishes with faithful people, that is a great church as well. Wonderful people, solidly Lutheran. If you like singing solid Lutheran hymns, Casper is the place to come.
I do like singing a good, solid Lutheran hymn. Absolutely.
Yes.
So thanks so much for your time today, Pastor Olson. What are your parting thoughts for our listeners?
Just that, with the COVID crisis and all the ramifications of the lockdowns, I think there's going to be a lot of mental health issues related to that. I'm starting to see some of that happen even now. I don't think we fully understand what forbidding people to socialize does to a person's mind. So emotionally, mentally, there's going to be a lot of work to do. And I would pray that our members and people listening to this reach out to their pastors if they're feeling lonely, or if they're just frustrated with it all, and talk and hear God's word, and have prayer, even if it's over the phone. I was camping in South Dakota, and I saw a lot of plates from Minnesota, I think, escaping their very restrictive lockdown. And that, I think, indicates a lot of people are getting tired of this. To be sure, we need to be careful and aware of medical things, but we also need to hear God's word gather with the faithful. Internet services are not should never be considered a replacement for actual flesh and blood meeting with brothers and sisters in Christ around the Lord's gifts. So that would be my prayer for everybody listening.
Amen. Thank you again. God's peace.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. Quick correction to the church's website. Trinity is at tlc-casper.com. And you can find links to Pastor Olson's church's website and all the other great things that he mentioned at the show notes page at lutherancartographer.com/34. Before you go, I encourage you to check out that homeschool curriculum if you're interested. That's at lutherancartographer.com/homeschool. And as well, make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast on Stitcher or on iTunes so you don't miss an episode. And while you're there, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me a rating and a review so that more people will see this podcast. Thanks again for listening. I'm Nicholas Weber. I'll talk to you soon.